Good morning. Welcome to Chats. Before I go any further, please, if you have any telephones, pagers, other noisemakers, please silence them. If, like me, you've read and reread One Morning in Maine to your own children and grandchildren, then you'll recognize today's presenter. Most of the 8 children's books that Robert McCloskey wrote feature his family and friends in the starring roles, especially his 2 daughters, Sally and Jane. Today, Jane McCloskey, the younger daughter, will talk about her father's art with emphasis on his paintings, which are less well-known than his books. Jane published her first book in 2011, Robert McCloskey, A Private Life in Words and Pictures. Her second book, McCloskey, Art and Illustrations of Robert McCloskey, will be released in August. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the books that Jane was going to sign sold out at the bookshop before today. However, there were 2 remaining which she has signed and which are available at the bookshop. And she has also signed book plates so that when the new book comes in and when they receive more of the old book, if you would like to order, you will have Jane's signature. Jane McCloskey has been many things, including house painter, Christmas wreath maker, environmentalist, and writer. She lives in a house she built herself on Deer Isle, near the island where she grew up. Please welcome Jane McCloskey.
Thank you guys for coming today. I'm Jane McCloskey.
Can you see a microphone?
Sorry,
Speak up.
Sorry, and can you hear? Let me see. I'm Jane McCloskey, and thank you guys for coming today. I have to read. If I go too fast or don't speak, yell at me. I'm going to talk about my father's art, particularly about his use of design. Design is a somewhat difficult subject, and I've only given this talk once before, so if you find yourself mystified or bored, please help me with your thoughts at the end so I can make this talk better. If there's one word my father used more frequently than any other when discussing art or anything made by people, it was the word proportion. When I was building my cabin, I was going to build it 16 by 24 feet, but he suggested that I build it 16 by 26 feet because it was a better proportion. 26 divided by 16 equals 1.625, and we shall see that this proportion of 1.625 to 1 is very close to one of the most important proportions in the history of art. My father gave formal interest to his interest in design. This is the proportion of my cabin. My father gave formal voice to his interest in design in his acceptance speech to the American Library Association when he won the Caldecott Medal for his book, Time of Wonder. He mentioned 5 elements of design. The first was repetition. For example, there are many apples on a tree or a herd of horses or gulls on a rock. But repetition is not exact, so good design has repetition and variation. Rhythm of the seasons, of growing shells and plants, of waves on the water and grass in the wind. If repetition is in space, then rhythm is in time and expresses itself in motion implied in the picture. In Blueberries for Sal, the book is built around the idea that Sal and her mother and Little Bear and her mother are in the middle of a summer blueberry season, but they're already looking ahead to the next winter and getting ready for the cold time by stocking up on good blueberries. So Blueberries for Sal is about the rhythmic progression of the seasons. In this particular picture, Mother Bear is tramping through the blueberries and munching on blueberries. Tramping and munching are both rhythmic motions in time and space, and Sal adopts the mother bear's rhythm and tramps right along behind her. A A third element of design is color. During the fallow period, my father had, after the publication of Time of Wonder, he spent the winter making a complete set of colors like the ones you see in paint stores. Nowadays, you could generate a set of colors with a few clicks of your mouse, but I think he found a deeper connection to colors by doing this work by hand. Here are some colors he set aside, maybe to use in a painting. Note on the color of the slides, the color Old Rose was one of my father's favorites, so I chose it as the background color for all of these slides. I was amazed at how well it harmonizes with all the pictures in this presentation. A fourth element of design is texture of wood and clay, stone, and natural fibers. My father felt very close to the natural world after writing Time of Wonder, and all his examples were of natural textures. A fifth element of design is form, the forms of plants and animals, the forms made by wind and water. Here is a rowboat, a form made by a human being. But my father said that the most important element of design was space relationship, how all the various elements of a picture are used in relationship to each other. Space relationship is another way of saying proportion. This talk is about my father's art, but I also want to show you pictures from other artists so that you can see that my father is one of a long line of artists who have worked consciously with proportion. This is Winslow Homer's Blackboard. You can see the precision of the various rectangles in this painting, formed by the lines where the floor meets the wall, the top of the wainscoting, the blackboard itself. It turns out that the rectangle drawn in the lower right of the blackboard has almost exactly the same proportions as my cabin. That rectangle will be the culmination of the school teachers' talk about geometric forms. Proportion is another word for the relationship of one thing to another, or one part to another part. There is proportion of size and shape. Symmetry is a kind of proportion where two or more things are the same size and shape. Sea urchin shells and snowflakes are symmetrical on all sides of the center point. The sea urchin has 5-pointed symmetry and the snowflake has 6-pointed symmetry. Animals and people are often symmetrical around the center plane. Exact symmetry is rare. I think this dog was photoshopped, and that's why. And this lobster I bought from a friend of mine named Marston, so the lobster's named Marston too. And lobsters have one claw heavier than the other, so they aren't quite symmetrical. Pictures are often symmetrical around the center line. Again, exact symmetry is rare. Here, Leonardo's Vitruvian man has feet that are not symmetrical. There's a different kind of symmetry, a symmetry of, and here's my sister knitting, and she's pretty symmetrical, but not quite, so which adds interest. There's a different kind of symmetry, a symmetry of proportion. The symmetry of proportion is called dynamic symmetry. You construct this rectangle by finding the midpoint at the bottom of the square and putting your compass point there. You swing an arc as shown, and that creates the proportion for this rectangle. This rectangle has the property that the proportion of the smaller rectangle on the right of the square has the same proportion as the larger rectangle. Luca Pacioli, who taught math and geometry to Leonardo da Vinci, called the proportion of this rectangle the divine proportion. This proportion is an irrational number with decimals that go on forever, 1.6180539, and so on. This proportion is usually shortened to 1.618, and the 1 is implied. 1.618 is called the golden ratio, and the rectangle is called the golden rectangle. The proportion of my cabin is 0.007, 7,000th away from the 1.618 proportion of the golden rectangle. There's Luca Pacioli. And this picture is, you see that little line of brown on the far right of that? That's the difference between my cabin and the golden rectangle. So you can see it's very small. We saw earlier that you could divide the golden rectangle into a square and a leftover rectangle. Oh, I didn't see it yet, wait a minute. There. A square and a leftover rectangle, and the smaller rectangle is the same proportions as a larger rectangle. You can also divide the smaller rectangle into a square and a leftover rectangle, and that rectangle into a square and a leftover rectangle. And theoretically, these proportions remain constant forever, though in practice some distortion set in as you draw smaller and smaller rectangles. Using a compass, you can draw a golden spiral in this rectangle. The rectangle drawn on Winslow Homer's Blackboard is also a golden rectangle. I've put a spiral in his rectangle. Here's my father's picture of pelicans in St. Thomas. The canvas measures 48 by 30, which is a proportion of 1.6 to 1. That you can see that there's a white border around the painting. When you look close up, there are lines which show that he designed this painting to be exactly the size it is. When I cropped the painting to remove the white border, the resulting painting measured 1.616, 2/1000th away from 1.618. I superimposed the subdivided golden rectangle on the painting, and you can see this square in the lower left, and you can see how the square picks up on that. So that was deliberate, obviously. And then you can put the golden rectangle all around the painting, and you can see how it lines up with all the, especially the horizontal lines and the vertical ones to a lesser extent. Let's look at some other rectangles. This is a root 2 rectangle. That's a square root of 2 for people who are mathematical, and it has a proportion of 1.414 to 1. And the root 3 rectangle has a proportion of 1.732 to 1. And the root 4 rectangle is two squares side by side. It has a proportion of 2 to 1. And the root 5 rectangle has a proportion of 2.236 to 1. And that's the square, the root 2, the root 3, the root 4, and the root 5. And they build on each other. They're all related. And the root 5 rectangle can be constructed by two different methods, and the one below is constructed so it's made up of a square with flanked by two golden rectangles. Or you could look at it another way, it's two overlapping golden rectangles. So what? Winslow Homer's Blackboard is a root 2 rectangle, and you can see how the diagonal, if you look at it, goes through her eye and lines up with her, lines up, it looks like, and it lines up with her pinafore on the going the other way, and hits her chin. So anyway, keep playing that. It's a pretty, when I cropped it, it was like between, anyway, it was close. This is El Greco's portrait of his son, and you can see how his collar lines up with the diagonal, and look how his paintbrush is at exactly right angle for that. And then it follows the line of his paintbrushes in his hand. I love how that works. In my father's book, Time of Wonder, most of the pictures are root 2 rectangles with the square on the right of the center, trough of the book, and the 0.414 on the left of the trough. A few of the pictures are root 4 rectangles, two squares side by side. Here's another picture based on the root 4 rectangle. And you can see how one of the square line intersects the left-hand side of the tunnel, and the second line intersects the bottom of the tunnel, and the third line intersects where the tunnel hits the edge of the painting. So that looks like it. Anyway, I like to play with spirals, and I put spirals around this boat. You see how nicely it fits. There's another one. Let's take a break from these rectangles and look at a picture my father did for the book Lentil. The story is about the town welcoming a native son returning home. The train has pulled into the station. The people have all gathered to meet the train. The band is ready to play, but the town curmudgeon is commandeered the highest place around, and in the sudden silence of the moment of the great man stepping off the train, the old dude slurps on a lemon. If you read this book, you'll find that Lentil saves the day. Anyway, it's a great picture, and here's a septogram, a 7-pointed star embedded in the illustration. And you can see how the angle of the roof is exactly the same as one side of the septogram, and the opposite roof parallels another piece of septogram, and how this line at the bottom extends out into the crowd, and the other line from the bottom extends out into the crowd. So I don't think that happened by mistake. Other artists place polygons in their painting. Here's Monet's boating. There's a pentagram superimposed on the painting. You can see that the lower right of the pentagram exactly covers the main sheet of the sail. The lady reclining on the left fits inside the lower left of the pentagram, except for her hat. The ribbon of her hat follows the left diagonal of the pentagram. The man's leg fits in the lower right point of the star, and his hat just fits on the upper horizontal of the pentagram. Oh, I skipped this part. I'll skip this part. Here's Leonardo's Vitruvian Man. The septogram is the basis for the position of the man's arms and legs. There's a dot on his big left toe, on the left. And a dot on his right incept where the septogram points land. His hands touch the upper septogram points, and his arms follow the upper lines of the septogram. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, born a generation after Leonardo, drew a man based on the pentagram. In Breezing Up in Winslow, Homer used the painting as based the painting on a hexagram. The mast of the boat exactly follows the line of the hexagram. When the hexagram is turned sideways, the line parallels the deck of the boat. The angle of the jib parallels another hexagram line. The color of the water in the lower corners of the painting follows a hexagram. And I put them together, and I thought it was, I jiggled with this and made it happen, but there's one star that's on where the rudder meets the tiller, which is like one of the most important parts of the boat. That's what steers it. And then to the left, where the sail and the mast meet, is one of the most important parts of the sail, as you sailors probably know. And then that star above the schooner, it's like it's blessing that pretty schooner. And then the star at the top center is just the star overall. That's my thought. And we're back to this picture of my father's. We're returning to the golden rectangle. I looked at this picture from Time of Wonder of my father, Sal, and me in Bucks Harbor. We've just bought groceries and emergency supplies to get ready for the approaching hurricane. I looked at that cabin door and it looked very black to me, as if begging to be noticed. Suddenly it reminded me of one of the inner rectangles of the golden rectangle. I tried out a rectangle on a picture and look how it fits. And another thing, my father was a sly one. He painted this picture in the 1950s when everyone saw Freudian symbols everywhere. When you see that spiral connecting that dark cabin opening with that great long thrusting bowsprit, it becomes obvious that my father was illustrating a nautical sexual couple. The secret life of boats. In the painting, my father ignores this byplay. He has to get his family home to the island and get ready for a hurricane. So here the golden spiral not only shows a spatial relationship between the cabin of our boat and the bow of the schooner, it also shows a psychosocial, or in this case, sexual relationship as well. How did my father use geometry in his work? He used grids. This one is 1/1000th away from this 1.618 rectangle. The second grid is 2 6.18 side by side. The third grid is the one that my father used to make his books. Lentil, Make Way for Ducklings, One Boy in Maine, Time of Wonder, and Burt Dow all had the same proportions. So how did my father make his grids? His grids have a few curveballs, but the basic method of making a grid is to create what is called an armature. You draw the diagonals of the rectangle, that's those red ones, and then draw the horizontal and vertical axes, that's the black ones. And then you draw a line from one corner so it intersects the diagonal at right angles. These are the green ones. The green lines intersect the red lines at right angles, and it happens that where the green line hits the bottom or the top of the picture creates a rectangle that has exactly the same proportions as the overall rectangle. So that's what this dynamic is about. It's creating rectangles that self-replicate more rectangles of the same proportion but in different sizes and orientation. Leonardo Davinci had a pentagram in his painting, I'm pretty sure, and the reason I'm pretty sure is this black diagonal and the right angle to that, which just exactly bisects that star, and on the other it lands exactly on the line. This is a grid I made just quickly. It's not very accurate, and here's another quick grid. I became a fan of grids because I think they give my doodly drawings a new energy and liveliness that my pictures don't have without the grid. Here's a picture of a goose I drew on Photoshop using a grid. I pretty much slavishly followed the grid lines. Once or twice a line was missing and I put it in and then followed it. So this isn't paint by the numbers, but paint by the grid. I don't think my father or other real artists who use grids are so dependent on the grid as I was, but I think it helps them liven up their compositions and helps make their subjects more real. A final note on armatures. Well, I won't even go into that. Oh, yes. How they do that, those polygons, I don't think they plunk them down in the middle of the painting any which way. I think that the armature that they create and the proportion of the rectangle they create sets up the angles for these pentagram polygons. And I haven't learned how that goes yet. That's my suspicion. In the title slide, we saw my father's picture of rowboats. This, by the way, is probably his most his most favorite painting. And it sat on our mantle for most of my life. I think it was his favorite painting. And when you look at it in terms of the golden rectangle, its proportion is 1.854, and it's divided by 3 equals 0.618. So this is 3 golden rectangles side by side. This pine cone comes from the Smith College Phylotaxic website and has a large number of pictures showing the mathematical basis of the arrangement of plant flowers and animals and leaves and pine cones. Once I started looking for golden spirals, I saw them everywhere. And I always wondered where the heart came from, and I think maybe it was derived from a golden rectangle, 2 golden rectangles. And this just was interesting to me. Artemisia Gentileschi, is that how you pronounce it, has painted a heart on her sleeve. And you can see it over on the right here. And I never would have noticed it, I don't think, if I hadn't been looking for spirals.
Where is it? I don't see it.
I don't see it either.
Right below the knobs on the neck of her instrument. Can you see it now? The ear on the top right is from off the internet, and I think it's a young woman, and this other ear is from a friend of mine who's probably in her late 60s. They say your ear grows all your life, and maybe she lost her dynamic symmetry, or maybe she just had an ear that isn't perfect. And this is Leonardo, or it's attributed to him, and she's got a perfect ear too. And just because I'm into spirals, I just outlined spirals where they just seem to fit all over the place. Not so pretty altogether, they're too crowded. This is a picture of Sal from one morning in Maine. Sal's showing her loose tooth to a curious seal when she slips on the seaweed. Here's the next page. Look at this spiral which starts on the curl of hair on her forehead. A spiral begins under her arm. Sometimes spirals seem to tell a story. The eye of this spiral says that Sal was standing on that place in the seaweed when she slipped. Now her bottom is in the air, but not for long, and her leg is flown skyward. The loon in the background is laughing, and the seal is gone. So it seems that sometimes the spiral, which exists in space, manifesting spatial relationships among various elements of the painting, is also working on a psychosocial level as well, manifesting the emotional and mental relationships among the entities of the painting. Here are the spirals of this picture seen against a green background. Sometimes I feel a little sacrilegious first defacing the painting with spirals and then wiping out the painting entirely. But this talk is about a talk on proportion and composition. If these spirals following the lines of the painting are harmonious by themselves, then they prove that the harmony of the spatial relationships of the elements of the painting as well. Here's another picture by my father in one morning in Maine. In the book, Sal has a loose tooth, and Mom is reassuring her that loose teeth are perfectly normal for girl Sal's age, and when it falls out, a new grown-up tooth will take its place. First, Sal's spiral for her face. She's happy having this important conversation with her mother. She likes Mom holding her hand. She likes that Penny is wagging his tail, because it means he likes her patting his head. And she can smell the bacon frying on the pan on the stove. Bacon for breakfast. Sal's second spiral says the same thing. She's glad about the bacon for breakfast, but that Penny's wagging tail says he likes her, and that Mom's giving her special attention. I guess this is Mom's spiral. Says she's pleased that Sal's getting old enough so she can have a real conversation with her. She's also aware the bacon on the stove. She'll have to turn it over pretty soon. And she's looking forward to her cup of coffee on the table. And Jane, she's so young you can't forget her for a minute. Mom has eyes in the back of her head. Penny likes Sal patting him. His spiral curls around Sal's arm and descends to Mom's lady parts. Penny is too polite to sniff, but he's aware of such things. He's wagging his tail. And like Sally, he's interested in the bacon on the stove. He'll probably get to lick the frying pan. So he goes from his eye around Sal's arm to Mom's living parts up to the frying pan. Jane and Mozzarella are the floor people. Jane is aware of Mozzarella behind her and might like to climb up on that chair and eat some cereal in a minute, but she's mostly interested in this tooth business. Sal is several years older than she is, and whatever Sal is going through now is what Jane will go through in a few years. It pays to pay attention. Mozzarella spirals and circles Jane because she likes her, but also because Mozzarella likes to keep close to her. Sometimes Jane spills her milk. Then Mozzarella spiral ascends up Penny's backside. She doesn't think much of Penny and comes to the frying pan. Mozzarella also helps to get a bit of that bacon. And here are the bacon, oh, I'm sorry, here we are. That's Jane and Mozzarella. And here are the bacon spirals. The bacon has the attention of everyone in the room except for Jane, who's on another planet. In the bacon spirals above, the spirals are all connected, clustered on the right side of the picture. There needs to be a spiral on the left to balance them, and the chair is the obvious place to put it. There needs to be, the spiral circles around the back of the chair, intersects the corner of the table, and exits through the top of the picture. There's that chair spiral, and this is my mom's, this is sort of the master spiral of the painting that integrates the right and left of the picture. And this is that chair spiral. Here are the last two spirals together. I put the spiral on that chair because the picture needed a spiral on that side. But then I realized what was probably happened. My father was sitting in that chair, but he's eaten quickly because he has to go clamming and catch the tide. You can see from the chair spiral that he's up and gone. And Mom's female spiral rises over the fray of getting breakfast for her young family to meet the other spiral in the empty chair. I bet they had a good time last night. And here are all the spirals. This is Marston again. You have to be aware of, I'm not at all sure that my father intended all those spirals consciously. Here's a photograph, and I certainly didn't put any spirals in, and Marston didn't either. So look how that spiral fits on that claw and goes around, and how it fits all those hind legs. It's amazing to me that that happened. And here's another spiral that goes around the elbow of that lobster, and you can see it hits that color change. It doesn't hit the edge of the lobster, but it hits where the color changes. And here again, fitting that front claw. And all of those pictures together. So that's all. That's all. So, does anybody want to ask questions?
Did your father ever talk about overlaying or underlaying his artwork with grids or spirals?
No, that's the part he didn't talk about. He did taught me the basics of dynamic symmetry when I was about 11. But he never told me, and I went off into teenagerhood, and he went in another direction, and I just never went back and asked him how he used it. So this was all sleuthing after he died, and I know he used these grids. He had them lying around, and they were on his easel from time to time.
Oh, you did? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Those grids are his grids. They were in the studio. And, but how he actually, to what extent he traced on them, I don't know. I don't, but
Okay.
Hi, I loved your talk.
oh, thank you.
Where is the rowboat painting now?
Repeat the question.
The rowboat painting.
It's at the Blue Hill Library. It's in storage. It was, we had I think, they had a show a couple of years ago, and they had another one this summer, so they probably do it every couple of years. Hi.
Is there any application of this to the writing side, or was it all the visual?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
Well, just the whole thing of these spirals and shapes, did it wind up somehow affecting the copy at all, or the story at all?
You mean the way the type was laid out?
No, just the development of the story. Was there an application from the visual to the written side of the stories?
I don't think so. He did consider himself an illustrator. He was proud of it, and he said pictures should, show what the text was saying, but also they should add more to the text.
So there's another question that kind of, did the stories at all come out of the pictures first? Or were they
He
illustrated?
didn't talk about his process. He was a very, a lot of this, I call it sleuthing, he didn't talk about what he did. He was very secretive.
Yeah, I was wondering, at least this is just my personal opinion. I was wondering, do you think that part of the reason that children's books that are written nowadays are, I mean, some of them are good, but they often seem not quite as good. And they don't have the staying power of McCloskey's work. And, I mean, we're talking about this now, obviously, that's staying power. Do you think that is related to the fact that he did the entire thing himself? That he wrote it and did the painting himself? I mean, what's your take on that?
I can just throw some thoughts out, but I don't think it's true necessarily. There weren't anywhere near as many children's books in those days, and so the ones that did get there got pretty good coverage. And another thing is, I am very proud of my father. I think he was one of the great illustrators of the 20th century. And so, it's a hard act to follow. But also styles change. I went down to the American Society of Illustrators in New York City and saw more recent pictures, and it's a different medium almost. It's a different language. It's styles change and fashions change. And, I don't know, whatever, I love Dr. Seuss, so he was very different from my father, but he had staying power too, so I don't know. So, that's all.
This might be a related question. I kept thinking, with all the layout that he did, that he must have had some very formal classical design training.
He did.
Where did he study art?
He started at a place called Vesper George in Boston, and then he went to the National Academy of Design in New York.
Ah, okay, so there was an academy involved, and that would explain a lot of the formal design.
And also this, Jay Hamage was the basis of this talk. Wrote a book called The Elements of Dynamic Symmetry in the early 20th century, and I think it was 1920 it was published. And so my father went to art school in the 1930s, and it was probably the latest thing then. And it was James Doherty. I have just been looking at Andy and the Lion, and he definitely used dynamic symmetry himself. And so, but then in the 40s and 50s, it went out of fashion, and there's been 60 years, 80 years, where my niece went to graduate school at, it's either Parsons or Pratt, I can never remember, but she'd never even heard of dynamic symmetry. And she says now, when I first started talking about it like 5 years ago, she said she'd never heard of it. And she says now her artist and graphics friends are beginning to talk about it. And so it's coming back into fashion.
I suspect it's been called many, many different things over the years, but it goes back to the Renaissance, actually.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you look at the first real successful perspective work in paintings and drawings and frescoes, you'll see a lot of the same principles being applied.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wrote a book about geometry and classical paintings, and one of my father's books I discovered after he died was Piero della Francesca, who was one of the great perspective and geometric designers of all time. So anyway, yeah, absolutely.
I'm just wondering, my father is also an artist. What was it like growing up, once you became older and as an adult, to, I don't know, basically look at yourself on the page. Here you are as a child, and how do you relate emotionally to looking at yourself? I'm interested because I have an experience of seeing myself in different stages as a young child growing up, and my father sketching me over a period of years. I'm just interested in, and if it's too personal,
when I was young, me in the book, I kind of said, "Oh, that's me in the book," So it was easy. But then I hit adolescence, and now I know with hindsight I had mercury poisoning that got increasingly serious, and I became self-conscious, shy, introverted, and so I became increasingly uncomfortable at being watched, and my father watched people. he saw them, and so as I got into teenage years, he stopped drawing me when I was about 13 because he said, "You just don't like to have me draw you, I can feel it." And I felt kind of hurt, but it was true. And my sister has always felt self-conscious about being drawn in the books, and she says, "That's not me, that's his idea of me." And so she has always felt a tension between who she is and what she's portrayed to be, and much more than I did. So and I hope that you have resolved any issues you have with that.
I wondered if some of the other painters or artists that you portrayed, such as Homer and Monet, if it was instinctive to them, or if they too had a classical training.
I think it was classical training. I think the Impressionists were the last ones that they sort of abandoned it, and after that it was more natural. And then this Hamage rediscovered it in the 20th century and tried to bring it back again, which he did for a while. But I think there were, in the Renaissance, I guess before, I guess it was 1700s, the British Academy and the French Academy were developed, and they started teaching art and how it ought to be done. And I think, but before that, they had, each artist had like a school, not a school, apprentices, and they all worked together, and it was passed down through the you know, the time of, that was part of what the artists did in their shops, and then it became formalized in the academies in the 1700s. And I've heard that the academies made it get very sterile, and so then people revolted against that. But the reason I was pretty confident that Monet, let's say, was using that deliberately was because he had a straight line, and it was that main sheet absolutely exactly corresponded to the pentagon. And when there's a straight line, it's usually pretty clear in the picture, like that they're following a pentagram, because what was that about?
That's me. I want to thank Jay very much for today's presentation. We hope you'll join us for the next chat with champions. It's August 4th, and it's going to describe and show you beautiful photos of the most beautiful seashore nature trails in the Mid-Coast. So, again, thank you, and thank you.